We're going to go live right now here on CBS in New York to One Police Plaza, a briefing being held by the NYPD on the death of Detective Brian Simonsen by friendly fire last night. Let's listen.
Everyone knew Brian. Everyone knew Brian was the cop that you reached out to if there was a problem that needed to be handled. And just the events of last night and what Brian did, it just shows the sort of man he was. He didn't have to be there. He was assigned to a delegates meeting in the morning. Being the union delegate for the 102 precinct detectives, he didn't have to go to work, but he made a decision that he had a job to do, and he wanted to get into work and do it. Brian was in the station house processing a robbery arrest that night when another great cop, his supervisor, Sergeant Matt Gorman, came up and had information about a group that was involved in another robbery that was supposed to be out in an area of the 102 precinct. So Brian and Matt did what cops do. They jumped in the car to do a surveillance in that area. While they were out there, the call came over of a robbery in progress over at the cell phone store at 120 Atlantic. And again, doing what great cops do each and every day, they ran to that danger. They didn't have to go there, but they're cops, and they ran over there to assist the other officers that were responding. Upon arrival at the scene, the officers went to the store with other officers, and the perpetrator, Christopher Ransom, charged at the officers with a gun raised, simulating firing at those officers. Chief Maloney will go into greater detail about exactly what happened during that incident. We will be releasing Mr. Ransom's photo to the media at the end of this photo conference, at the end of this news conference, and we're going to be looking for the public's help in getting more information about him, about what he may or may not be involved in. So we're looking for a lot of help from the public and from the media to get his picture out and to get as much information we can about Mr. Ransom. I was at the hospital earlier today. I visited with Sergeant Gorman, and he's still being treated for the leg wound, but I can tell you, he's not the least bit concerned about his own injury. He's overcome by the emotion of losing his friend and his partner, Brian Simonsen, as are all the officers in the 102 precinct that I visited today. I ask that every New Yorker keep Brian's family and the members of the 102nd precinct and every New York City cop in their prayers. As a department, we will never forget Brian and his sacrifice. His legacy is one of unflinching service and now the ultimate sacrifice. And he lives on in the tremendous work of all our New York finest. Thank you. Kevin, you want to give your update?
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to start by reminding you we're about 20 hours into this incident, so this is an ongoing active investigation, but let me just bring you up to speed where we are at this point in the investigation. Yesterday, approximately 6:09 p.m. hours, the 911 call received a call from a witness who saw our perpetrator put a mask on and enter the T-Mobile store at 120 Atlantic. That witness provides information that the perpetrator has a mask and is also armed with a firearm. The perpetrator takes the two employees that are in that store to the rear office inside that location where he begins to commit his robbery. In response to the 911 call, Sergeant Gorman and Police Officer Detective Simonsen are around the corner conducting a surveillance on an unrelated incident when they respond to the location along with 6 uniformed members of the service. The 2 detectives and the uniformed personnel arrive approximately the same time at 18:12 hours. When they arrive at the scene, Sergeant Gorman and 2 uniformed officers enter the location. As they enter, the perpetrator comes from the back of the location, that office, and he presents himself with the firearm pointed in the direction of the officers. At that time, the officers exit the location as the perpetrator continues running in their direction. When the perpetrator gets to the front of that store, shots are fired. We have a total of 7 members of the service who discharged a total of 42 rounds during this incident. As a result of the incident, the 2 police officers are shot. They're removed to Jamaica Hospital. The perpetrator is also shot, and he's removed to Booth Memorial, where he is currently under arrest and being processed for this incident. The Officers that responded to the scene were equipped with body-worn cameras. We have 5 officers whose body-worn cameras captured part of this incident. Those body-worn cameras, along with additional surveillance that's been recovered from inside the store, are currently under review and part of our investigation. At this point, we can open it up to any questions you may have. It looks like the squad rolls up first, but moments later, there's uniformed personnel that are also responding. They arrive almost simultaneously.
And all the shooting happens outside the store?
All the shooting happens outside the store, both to the left and to the right of the entrance.
Chief, two questions. First of all, you said that Sergeant Gorman had gone into two uniforms and Detective Simonsen was outside, or they both know that?
No, we believe at this point that Sergeant Gorman goes in with the 2 uniforms. Detective Simonsen is outside the location. The officers back out of the location as the perpetrator's advancing towards them, and the shots are fired outside of the location.
You had said that the detectives and the detective and the sergeant were around the corner on a different, I guess they were, this robbery pattern that they went out on. Do you believe this is what they thought might happen that night?
Absolutely not. They were looking for something completely different. Another job came over, and they did what cops do. They responded to that job as backup to the uniformed officers.
Were any of the officers wearing vests? And you said where Detective Simonsen?
Oh, where was it? You got that?
Yep. So the Detective Simonsen was hit 1 time in the chest.
Was anybody wearing a vest? Was he wearing?
Detective Simonsen did not have a vest on. The other personnel there, the uniformed personnel, did have their vests on.
Sorry, Chief Command Force Investigation.
Yes, sir.
Do squad detectives usually wear vests? Do squad sergeants usually wear vests if they're doing surveillance?
The department procedure is that they wear vests, yes.
Just for clarification, were Sergeant Gorman and Detective Simonsen were not in uniform?
They were not in uniform. They were in plain clothes.
Okay, and then would they partners work together regularly?
They're both assigned to the 102 squad. Detective Gorman is, Sergeant Gorman is Detective Simonsen's boss at the squad.
Chief, when you mentioned firearms, this was not a real firearm, correct?
The perpetrator's firearm was an imitation pistol, yes.
Did Detective Simonsen and the sergeant, did they fire any of the shots, if you know, and they were not mistaken for suspects, I think?
They were not, yes, and both officers discharged their weapons.
Chief, I'm just trying to, if they're all outside, firing inside, is there potential of maybe a ricochet?
Again, it's all part of the ongoing investigation. You have officers outside the store, some to the right of the store, some to the left of the store, firing towards the store.
I know you have an extensive background on the suspect. He's got 8 prior arrests. I wonder if you can talk anything about, there's videos out there of the suspect going to precincts and
Yeah, we're looking at all that video. Obviously, within 20 hours into the investigation, we're gathering all the social media videos. He has prior arrests, I believe convictions, only misdemeanor convictions in the past, one of which was an impersonation of a police officer running into the 7-7 precinct, I believe it was. So, again, this is what we want to do. This is the public's help that we're looking for to see how much more we can find out about him. Let me go all the way over here.
Describe the scene where officers right there to the left and to the right as the suspects in the middle. Are they firing? Are they in a semicircular position? Are they opposite each other? Are they staggered?
They're coming, if he's coming out of the store, and they're down the block each way to the right and left.
Statements about wanting to die.
I don't know if you made it.
At this point, we don't have any statements made by him at that point, and the charges are pending with the Queens District Attorney's Office at this point.
Rocco.
Two questions. How long did he get there? On his first officer. How long did he take? And secondly, based on what you see in the video, talk a little bit about where and cover the original order and analysis of that.
So just your first question, 18, 12 hours, 6:12 p.m., the first unit arrives. 18:13, so just under a minute later, the first shots are fired. So the discharge happens almost 30 seconds, 40 seconds after their arrival at the scene. The discharge lasts about 11 seconds, the first shot to the last shot. And as far as positioning, that's still all part of the investigation. We do have body-worn cameras. We do have the surveillance TV. We have not conducted interviews yet, so that'll be all part of our process during the investigation, identifying who was where and who fired from where.
And just jumping on that, just understand, this happens in seconds. It goes from 0 to 60. You're investigating a possible crime, and all of a sudden someone's charging at you, pointing what you believe to be a firearm, simulating firing at you. It raises everything very quickly. Get back.
If you could describe that action by Mr. Ransom, as you were saying, he's charging towards the officers. What was he doing provoking the officers? What was his physical action?
Yep. So there's one entrance to the location that's at the front of the store on Atlantic Avenue. The officers come in that location. Like I said earlier, the perpetrator comes from the rear office. He walks towards that, advances towards that front door. As the officers go out, the perpetrator makes his way right up to that front door. He holds up his hand with the firearm in his hand, and he simulates that he's firing at the officers. Then he retreats back into that store as the shots are being fired. He's taken into custody inside the T-Mobile store.
Just to recap, Detective Simonsen, Sergeant, were among those who actually fired, I think it was 40 shots.
42 shots total.
But they, both of the squad members did discharge. I can't say how many.
The squad sergeants, we believe Detective Simonsen fired 2 shots, and the sergeant fired 11 shots.
The other cops.
The other 5 discharging officers make up the balance of the 42, yes.
So 231, please.
Talk about Simonsen's family, children.
He is married, no children, and he has a mother that's still alive. Good.
Can you talk about, in the training that you train officers in a situation like this, what are the officers told? And I understand this is still fresh, but what are they told when you have a situation like this in the training, really help them when the situation gets out of control like this?
Every 6 months when you go to the range, you get trained. We talk about the tactics. We talk about incidences that have occurred over the course of the last 6 months. You want to avoid that crossfire situation, but understand, it's great to train, but everything happens in a second. You're reacting within seconds, and you're in fear for your life. Your adrenaline is high. We try our best to train, and we'll continue to train. It's our job to try and keep our officers safe. It's horrible. This is the worst feelings you can have. It's the worst thing that we ever go through as a police department. Tina, good.
Chief, I need to ask you, is it possible the sergeant shot
We don't know at this point who shot who at this point. We know there's a lot of shots. It was a chaotic scene. And just bring it back. This scene is caused by a man charging at police officers. We say advancing. He was moving quickly at police officers, pointing a gun at them. The blame goes to that individual for doing that.
Sounds, first of all, like the 2 uniforms that the sergeant backed out. It sounds like they would have had a reason to fire in the store, but they were able to bring themselves. The second question, in the big picture, somebody who spends his whole career in one unit, how unusual is that, and how kind of, what does that say about him?
It shows you the sort of man he is. Like I said earlier on, this is a guy who loved that community. He loved the cops in that community. He loved the people in that community. This was his life. He loved the 102 precinct. We have this all throughout the city. There are cops like him, start as a patrol cop within the precinct, perform tremendously, and move up to the detective squad where they start doing investigations, get their gold shield. It says a lot for the sort of man that he was.
He has me in Rocco.
All right.
The other officers that were involved in the incident, are they investigating today? But it's happening.
Listen, again, they're all going through a lot of emotional distress. One of their best friends died in an incident there. So most of them are out sick at this point that were involved. We are supplying them with the comfort they need, and all New Yorkers, media, everyone's got to give them the support that they need. Dangerous situations that we ask our men and women to go into every day. They're human, and the emotions that they're feeling right now, losing a great friend, it's hurting. They're hurting. There's a lot of hurt going on in the 102.
Let's go, please.
We didn't have any documented mental illnesses to us, but obviously from what we're receiving right now, it's something we're going to look at, and that's why we're asking for the help to find out a little more about this individual. Okay, thank you very much.
We have just been listening to an NYPD press briefing on the tragedy that occurred yesterday in Richmond Hill, Queens. Chief of Department Terrence Monahan beginning by saying he didn't have to be there. Brian and Matt, they ran to the danger to assist. And that Detective Brian Simonsen loved his community in Richmond Hill. He loved his precinct. This was his life. And then the chief of department went through what happened yesterday. 6:12 p.m. They got a 911 call from a witness who said they saw a person put on a mask and go inside a T-Mobile store in Richmond Hill. 2 employees were inside. The call went out. Detective Brian Simonsen and his boss, Sergeant Matt Gorman, were around the corner working on something completely different. They responded as backup to the 6 uniformed officers. Chief Monahan says the suspect then charges toward the officers and that the suspect was pointing what was assumed to be a weapon. It was found to be an imitation weapon. The chief also going over the number of shots were fired because, as we know, the detective died from friendly fire. The shots were fired all outside, happening outside the store. 7 officers involved, 42 rounds. It happened at about 30 seconds. And again, they're talking about the chaos that ensued, something so very fast happening. The shots fired, took about 11 seconds, the actual length of the shots fired. The chief saying they don't know who fired the shot that took the life of the detective, but he was fired in the chest. The officers, 5 of them, have body-worn camera video. That video is being investigated. Detective Simonsen and his partner were in plain clothing. They did not have vests on. Detective Simonsen fired 2 shots. Sergeant Gorman fired 11 shots. Again, 42 shots fired in total. Sergeant Gorman is in the hospital. He was shot in the leg and just grieving his partner's death, as they all are. The perpetrator, 27-year-old Christopher Ransom. Chief Terrence Monahan saying his photo will be released because they want to know from the public what people know about him. As we do know, he had priors and convictions, including impersonating a police officer. Again, Chief Monahan asking for any help. And we're also waiting for the Queens District Attorney on the specific charges. They have not been announced yet. Detective Brian Simonsen, who was part of a close-knit community in Richmond Hill, where he served in the NYPD for nearly 20 years, and in Calverton on Long Island, where he lived, is survived by his wife and his mother, the NYPD, his neighbors, and all the people he protected. I'm Dana Tyler. Right now, we'll have more coming up on that story.